Welcome back to another episode of Comp and Coffee. Excited here to be here today with Bill and Ruth and myself, Russ. And Ruth, we just got back from HR Tech down there in Las Vegas. What was your highlight, Ruth, of HR Tech? What was sort of the, going into it this year? Last year was a little small. Of course, the year before that, it was not really held. What was your impression this year? Is it back? Is it returned to its former craziness? What was your feeling?
Definitely back from like 2019 standards, even bigger and better in terms of exhibitors there and their stands. I mean, there were some pretty amazing investments in terms of stands there, but really exciting to see some of the key trends in that around employee experience and employee engagement, and really seeing some of the predictive trends we saw in HR Tech coming to fruition.
Yeah, there's some cool stuff happening. Bill, have you ever been to HR Tech?
I have. Not in several years, but I've been there, yes. Yeah,
I was kind of with you, Ruth. It felt the attendance probably wasn't back to its heyday of like near 10,000 people, but it was easily 2,000 or so folks. But it seemed like, how the last couple of years they've been kind of letting you roll over your booth fees and stuff. I think it kind of all built up, and years of conference budget kind of landed with like these massive vendor booths this year, which was sort of funny and fun to see. But one of the terms, I mean, there was many new things there, but a lot of just old but important themes that are, being rethought or reintroduced or reminded about. And one of the things that we definitely heard on the floor and around everywhere, and it's kind of been in the news a lot lately, and so we thought it might be kind of a fun thing to talk about, which is the term quiet quitting. And so Ruth, like, why is this hot right now? I know it's been buzzing around on social media, and we've seen it on the major networks. Quiet quitting, people are doing it. Is it a generational thing? What was the source of all that, Ruth? Where did it come from?
Well, it definitely originated in social media. So if you're into taking career advice from TikTok, this is where this originated. So it was a post back in July from an engineer in New York called Zaid Khan, who's 24. So he's in the Gen Z generation. And he really posted a short video saying, he described quiet quitting as you're still performing your duties, but you're no longer subscribing to the hustle culture mentality that work has to be your life. And we've seen a lot of people kind of jumping in on this conversation as a result of that initial post of his.
Yeah. Did they think of it as like a generation specific thing, or is this just everybody's sort of, is he kind of presenting it as all generations are having this mentality now? It's a post-COVID thing.
Well, I think initially, I mean, it's, the furore around the term is built and built and built. And if you Google quiet quitting, you probably see every, supplier and vendor and advisory firm, passing opinion on it. But initially it was positioned as a Gen Z phenomenon. But I think as people have thought about it, and we can talk more about this, it's more than just a Gen Z phenomenon. It's a workforce phenomenon, I think. So
probably
saying that word phenomenon.
That anyway. Seems right. So Bill, as our compensation and HR ombudsman here at Comp and Coffee, how would you describe quiet quitting? Would you say this is a new phenomenon and oh my goodness, what an amazing insight? Or do you feel like this is branded old activities? What are you feeling?
In a word, yes. It's both. I mean, I think Ruth sort of got a pretty good concise summary of what the current iteration and the new term quiet quitting is, and I'll get to this in a second. It doesn't actually entail quitting or things like quitting, but I think that if we think about it, we'll all realize that in the wonders of modern media and information spreading globally super fast, the words matter, and the fact that it has the word quitting in it means its meaning is likely to evolve to be something else from what it was originally intended to be. And in this case, there are some people that think it's about, effectively quitting. I don't mean doing it well. I mean, doing
all but quitting. Yeah.
Okay, right. Exactly. I'm not going to quit. I'm going to make you fire me, kind of thing. But the original essence of quiet quitting, as Ruth said, is it's not going above and beyond or signing up for additional work that's not paid for. Some call it work to rule. And then you just do what's in your job description. You stay within the four corners of the page of your job description, and that's referring to both the parameters of what's expected of you, but also the time. It's like 5 o'clock is the end of the day. I stop working at 5. It doesn't matter, what's going on. Hopefully, you don't have police or fire, quiet quitting. So my shift's over. Let the house burn. But I think some say that it's more, or in reality, it's less, and that it's the concept is about doing the bare minimum to not get fired. Either way, I'd say from an employer perspective, especially if you have a remote workforce, it's dangerous because you have people who are not on site, which means they're not in site, and you don't have a perfect view on what they're doing. And so it also becomes hard to calibrate what constitutes a full day or a full week's worth of work, because you're not seeing the product as readily. And I would think of it the extreme version, which I think it's important for us to talk about both, because some people think quiet quitting is that bare minimum, that the level at which you should get fired, but you're not going to. And I think you need to watch for that, because that's also here. That's also in the concept. That's what some people think is going on. And it is happening in a lot of organizations. I just don't think that's the majority case.
Yeah, I love.
You want to add to it?
I love what you said about. I agree with everything you just said there, and I think it's interesting. You pointed out that the rule, if we look at the phraseology that Ruth shared at the beginning about the gentleman on TikTok who did a video and said, right, you are still, and he defined this. So his definition is you are still performing your duties, but you're no longer subscribing to the hustle culture that work is your life.
Right.
That to me sounds somewhere between the phrase work to rule and work-life balance, right? Like somewhere in that zone is actually not some kind of rude anti-employer sentiment. It's really just work-life balance, but be more bold about how you say it. Whereas you're right, if you take the phrase quiet quitting in absence of that paragraph, then you get, people are just trying to get paid to do as little as they can, if not nothing, right? And so I think there's an important thing here, and it goes back to sort of talent management and corporate culture, right? You gave the example, Bill, like you stop right at 5 o'clock, like a what's interesting about today, particularly in post-COVID, is so many of us now have remote employees, and so many of us are hiring remotely. And so many of our HR departments and our leaders have said, this is great. We can hire from anywhere. And the result of that, here's a simple example of where quiet quitting could become prevalent and semi-justified, is all of a sudden you've got workers in the East Coast, workers in the West Coast, workers overseas in different time zones. And people are scheduling meetings without thinking about that too much. And all of a sudden you've got a 7 a.m. meeting, and you've got a 5 o'clock meeting, and you've got a 7 p.m. meeting. And at some point, you're just going to say, look, I can do this every once in a while for a critical project or something, but this can't be every day. And they will pull back. And in my mind, setting boundaries on that and saying, sorry, guys, if you send me an invite for a 5 o'clock meeting, I will decline. Is that not giving your all? Is that quiet quitting, or is that work-life balance? Ruth, what's your reaction to all that?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. From both sides, it could mean so many different things. As Bill said, it could mean effectively, working to rule. It could mean coasting, seeking better work-life balance, prioritizing your own well-being. And so, depending on how you view it, depends whether you could see it as a positive or negative thing. I do think, though, it's part of this it's another thread in this whole conversation around how workplace culture is being redefined, not only as a result of how technology is influencing how the workplace is evolving, but the impact that COVID had as well. So the transformation that we're seeing in the workplace. But we know across all of this, we do have a significant employee engagement issue, and that isn't changing. And there's a whole load of new surveys that came out this year that continue to show how employee engagement is dropping off. The latest Gallup polls show employee engagement dropping for the first time in a decade, dropped by 2% from 36 to 34%. And then there was a new McKinsey study that's just come out that I was reading this week, which was a global study. It looked at 6 countries. But that highlighted that 2 out of 5 employees said that they were thinking about leaving in the next 3 to 6 months. So does that mean they're the ones that are quiet quitting? So I do think it is also part of this engagement issue that we have going on in the workforce at the moment.
What's your reaction to that, Bill? I think that's really insightful, Ruth, the engagement angle on this.
Yes, I mean, there's so many things between what the two of you just said. I can just go for a long time, so stop me.
Please do, Bill. It's Comp and Coffee. I'm going to sip my coffee while you talk about engagement. I see Ruth is enjoying her tea right now, or coffee. Ruth is a coffee. Go ahead, Bill.
So I don't even know where to start. I'll start at the end because it's the last thing that I heard was the McKinsey study. At some previous episode of Comp and Coffee, we talked about this. Is when you ask employees if they intend to leave, the numbers that say yes is huge. It's always huge. The numbers that actually quit, not so big. It does go up and down, but it's, the 2 out of 5 or whatever. I mean, I think a couple of years ago it was 50% said they were going to leave in the next 6 months or something. But that is a problem. Engagement's a problem. And I'm going to add another new term, catch you guys off guard, that I heard over the weekend listening to a podcast or reading an article was dysfunctional turnover. I'm not sure if you guys have heard this.
Yeah.
It was in the context of categorizing types of turnover, and it was talking about employees leaving because of what's going on in the organization, of dysfunctions, of decreases in innovation, of the deterioration of the company culture or the deterioration of the company's reputation, loss of productivity, loss of knowledge, difficulty hiring top talent, lack of respect for management, all of those things that you would consider to obviously be dysfunction are causing people to leave, or, I would say, not everybody leaves. You get people just being disengaged, and disengagement brings you to the idea of quiet quitting. Let's call it both definitions. Some people will just say, there's no point in killing myself. I'm never going to get that big bonus at a company like this, or, I'm just going to coast until I can find something else. I think all that's out there.
Well, I want to go to Ruth on the dysfunctional turnover comment, because I think that's really interesting. And I also want to go back to you, Bill, on did the source for that list that there's an increase in dysfunctional turnover. But one of the things that came to my mind as you were highlighting this, Bill, we just got out of a season, a year ago or so, we weren't talking about quiet quitting. We were talking about the Great Resignation. And in that environment, that market environment, that opportunity environment where every company needed people, they were all rehiring, the economy was recovering from COVID, things were looking pretty solid from an economic standpoint. People just jump jobs because it's like, I could go do a better job if my company sucks, or I have dysfunctional turnover, is the more political way to say it. But all of a sudden now we're in a situation where, sure, unemployment's still low, and theoretically you go get a new job, but there's a lot of uncertainty in the market right now. So you might be less inclined. So maybe another source of the quiet quitting sort of mindset is, well, I'm not as comfortable going to a new job. What if that company struggles financially and they go out of business? Or what if I don't get hired as rapidly as I think, and I'm less likely to just jump without a net. So maybe I'll just coast for a little while, let the economy recover. Then I'll go look for something new if this place is still dysfunctional. What's your reaction to that, Bill? Does that seem like it might be a thing?
I think it's definitely a thing. And this is the weirdest economy that I've seen in my career, where like metrics are good, but day to day can feel bad, and it's like unemployment is low, wages are high, and yet people are hesitant to leave their jobs for fear they're going to go like from bad to worse. Or, a lot of employees have, and Ruth may jump in on this, a lot of employees have this mindset of last in, first out. So they're scared to switch jobs and then have the new company have problems and have to have some sort of downsizing or layoff, because then you're first to go. And now you've just lost two jobs in a short period of time, the one you actually quit and the one that you got laid off from. So I think people do, pull back and say, the devil I know, or whatever, I'll stay. But, tying it back is they do just stop. Like, it's hard once you stop being focused on your job and, delivering and being engaged. It's hard once you disengage to re-engage.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Go ahead, Ruth. What's your reaction to all that, Ruth? Because
absolutely agree. But it's hard once you've gone down the slope of disengagement to come back up again. Yeah, I mean, I think we probably will see an increase in this notion of quiet quitting, as said, as people feel uncertain about their own kind of financial stability. I'm in the UK, and we've just had a pretty traumatic kind of 48 hours here from an economy perspective, with our new Prime Minister and Chancellor. It's all gone crazy, and people like looking at that are concerned about their mortgage rates. They're concerned about how they're going to afford to live, and will they have to sell their houses. And against that environment, that doesn't foster an environment where people often are confident about changing jobs. You see, the change job ratio definitely drops against that kind of economic environment. So, but does that mean those employees, then you've got a load of disengaged employees sitting within your workforce because they're too scared to quit? And that's not a great place to be.
Oh, definitely not.
Right. So what do you guys think? So I think we've done a pretty good job of sort of identifying the sort of the underlying maybe causes, and it's not really new, but maybe it's people are being thoughtful about it. I do think there is also since many organizations are remote full-time now, or hybrid, much remote kind of thing, I do think there's a tendency to work longer hours. Initially there was all that happening, and I think people are pulling back against that too. And I wonder if companies are misreading that pullback of trying to reclaim a little work-life balance, and they're misreading it that way, and they're coming down a little harder on their employees than maybe they should, and that's creating the perception of dysfunctional workplace, or even a fully dysfunctional workplace. And then you're in a situation where you've got folks that are just like, okay, fine, I'll work to rule or less. Any thoughts, Ruth? I'll start with you. Any thoughts on how we might be able to help from an HR or specifically a compensation perspective? Is there a way to sort of, are there policies we can put in place, either from HR or comp?
I think I'll go from the HR perspective first, and maybe Bill can jump in on the comp side. I think if we think about diversity in organizations, maybe we need to think about creating space in organizations for all types of workers, because you will have workers who want to set those boundaries. Maybe, we had the millennials with their side hustle, and they were happy to come to work, but they also wanted to do the stuff that was more meaningful to them potentially, or, gave them greater joy. And so you may have employees like that, but you may also have employees who are like, this is what they do and they want to work to live. It doesn't mean we should all be the same. And so maybe in the workplace, we need to be able to cater for both types of employee. And there are probably many more on the spectrum in between. So that really kind of challenges our sort of one size fits all, often HR policies in terms of performance management and paying for performance. So I don't know what, Bill, you think about, how does pay for performance impact these quiet quitters?
I think there's a lot to that, and there's a lot going on. I think the one of the things that the quiet quitting phenomenon can highlight is the idea that your pay for performance program doesn't work, and that it's not, the concept isn't getting into the employee. And and when it comes to money, employees get the concept. So the fact that people are willing to do less work, just because they're fed up or just because, they don't see the point, means that you're not encouraging people to overperform so that you can pay them more. So making your pay programs more real could help. I mean, there's a whole HR initiative, communications initiative involved here to get people engaged, to, do your engagement surveys and then listen to what your employees are saying. I mean, all too often those things get reviewed by the CEO or by management. It's like, oh, they don't understand, and it's like that right there tells you that you have a problem when, when the people at the top think that the people who are disengaging don't understand. It's actually not those people that don't understand. It's management. So I think that's important. And I think it brings out something else that I hadn't heard until we said we were going to talk about this. Is another phrase that comes up a lot when you're looking up quiet quitting is acting your wage, which I think is funny. And it gets to that point. It's like, and you hear these sarcastic comments or, wise ass comments from people, it's like, they don't pay me enough to do that. Or,
right.
What are you going to pay me to get me to? Well, yeah, but my pay grade. What are you going to pay me to get me to take that call?
You don't pay me enough for this. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and and it's not completely a joke or a throwaway comment. There, that's running through the person's mind. There is meaning there, and you should be listening to that.
And well, this I love
acting your wage. I love it. That's got to be the title.
I love acting your wage. I want a T-shirt.
I laughed.
I want a coffee mug for Comp and Coffee. Pay scale on one side, act your wage on the other. One thing, maybe this is where, compensation meets this engagement idea because, Ruth, you mentioned the idea, and I know you've talked for many years about the concept of, personalized compensation and thinking differently about this, and one size fits all doesn't work. And it's almost like, and it comes back to culture, right? Maybe it's where compensation meets culture. Maybe it's, so in other words, if you have a culture, a lot of companies are trying to have a global same size fits all culture, right? Where we won't ask you to work past 5 o'clock. We'll have half days on Fridays. We will not ask you to work on weekends, right? But the reality of it is during certain crunch times, you do, right? Or maybe you don't. Maybe the company's really good at enforcing that, but maybe there are some go-getters who kind of want to put the extra time in, and they don't know how. But imagine a situation where your compensation work kind of like overtime in a way. Like if you're willing to take extended hour meetings during the day to help support international employees / clients, maybe, and it's a little different than overtime because maybe your salary is slightly different than someone who's like, no, I really need work-life balance. I need my day to end at 4:30 or 5. And maybe we think about that it's almost like building in effort with your compensation as part of the formula. And I know we kind of do it at the job code level already, thinking about the effort for jobs and the complexity of the jobs and the skills required for the jobs, but we don't really, but I don't know if what I'm talking about is the same. This is like people could be in the same role. You could have a bunch of managers, for example, but some of them can put the extended extra hours in and some of them cannot or don't want to. And maybe that's okay to Ruth, your point about kind of thinking about, you need to have all kinds of folks in your organization. How do you personalize that and make the person who wants to sort of not think of it as quiet quitting, just think of it as I need to have a stronger work-life, life balance to my work, as opposed to someone else who wants a stronger work balance to their life. Did that make sense?
I mean, that's kind of how performance-related pay works, isn't it? The harder you work, in theory.
In theory, but it's based on outcomes.
Does it always? Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I think, I think definitely we do need to rethink the one size fits all, and it's really part of this evaluation. We talk about it a lot in relation to pay equity is really focusing in on what are you actually paying for. And then is that actually playing out in how pay is allocated in your organization? And we are, we're seeing more companies starting to think about, you mentioned formulas, Russ, starting to think about formulaic pay, maybe pay as, a derivation of the skills that you have, potentially some of the experience you have and things like that. As you say, maybe we need to layer this on too, is that, you're the person that picks to say, I want to go the extra mile. I don't know how you'd actually manage it in reality though, but
right.
I think it's definitely part of that conversation about what are we actually paying for.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I want to jump in. I think it's the one size fits all it's a bad model for most things. I also think like bright line, hard and fast rules are dangerous. We'll never ask you to work on the weekend.
Right.
That's just setting yourself up for failure and creating like bad feelings with people. We'll rarely do that. We will avoid that, whatever. But I think you got to be careful. I do like the idea, and I have seen this where, if you're going to work, West Coast hours or, Asian hours or European hours from, somewhere in the U.S., like that you get paid differently, or there are different expectations for you. So it's same job, could be different pay because, don't call in right when I say this, like hazard pay, you're doing like a less appealing job, or
a lot of times third shift bakers get paid more than morning bakers because it's harder hours.
Right. But in white collar jobs, it's a little less standard to do that. But it, it could be. But I would also say, and, getting a little like about myself here, I got into a disagreement once with somebody, with a boss who, someone on our team in consulting, wanted, more work-life balance and wanted to work, 4 days a week. So 30 hours a week, I think was the time, for 3/4 pay. And I said, but wait a minute, we are all routinely working 60 to 90 hours a week at full salary. And so you've got somebody who's working half to a third of that, but getting paid 3/4 of my salary. And it's like, can I just work 40 hours a week and get my full salary? Like, and they were like, that's not, you're not being fair. You're not understanding what's going on. I'm like, I'm not sure that I'm the one that doesn't get it. It created, it wasn't just me. A lot of people were like, wait, you can't, you can't calibrate things that way. And you really have to think that through.
It's interesting. You think what will happen at year end, when we get to like annual compensation allocation time, and how the quiet critter is going to feel then, because underneath most kind of pay allocation systems, the people that have gone the extra mile, the people who have, sought to learn new things and, potentially engage more with leadership, et cetera, they're going to be the ones that will be paid more. So as a quiet quitter, will you be frustrated by that? And then does that only, build your level of disengagement? I don't know.
Right. You ask for promotions probably too, right? Is that going to bother you, or is that cool? Theoretically.
Oh, definitely will bother you. What Ruth said actually makes me ask another, it's probably a rhetorical question here, is like, over time, are the non-quiet quitters, are the fully engaged people still going the extra mile, or are they going an extra 3/4 mile or half mile? Like,
right.
Are they also cutting back on that extra effort?
Yeah. Quiet quitting makes you look better as being only a semi-quiet quitter.
Yeah. You can still be twice as good as those people, because, I do think this whole, the remote and hybrid workforce is going to create a big problem for, HR people in general, but managers also, in understanding like how much work is getting done. I've never believed all those, surveys and polls that, we're so much more productive. In the early days, people had nothing else to do, which also goes into the quiet quitting issue. It's like, there was no after work activity. So people could work later. They could come back online at 9, 10 o'clock at night. But then they started to realize, you can drop the kids off at school yourself. You don't need the nanny. You could go to soccer practice or the games. You can, sneak out and play golf late in the afternoon and come back and finish up your work. And that people are naturally creating, the optimal work schedule, work environment for themselves. But they're also, seeing where they can cut corners and, oh, well, I normally would have been getting coffee and chatting with people for half an hour, so I can take half hour off and, do my laundry. Whatever it is, people have a good way of rationalizing bad decisions.
Yeah, I think that's
or decisions
right.
that aren't in favor of the employer.
Well, we're running a little long, but I did have one more question I wanted to ask, because we kind of started off with, is this sort of a generational thing, or are there different perceptions by generation? And Ruth, you made a couple comments and then said, well, we can talk about it later. So I wanted to make sure we came back to it. So Ruth, is this really a Gen Z thing, or is this sort of just an interesting issue everywhere that's seen through different lenses based on your generation?
Yeah, I don't think it's a Gen Z thing. I mean, I think particularly after COVID, so many people are reevaluating their relationship with work. And we saw that in the Great Resignation. It was all age groups, particularly even older workers. We called it the Great Retirement, who were leaving the workforce, or, people changing their careers. So I don't think it is. We like to characterize it as a generational thing. 5 years ago, if you think we were all talking about millennials and, what did millennials want? They wanted to do meaningful or purposeful work. So I do think it's not just going to be those employees that will be impacted. I think where the problem comes is where those employees potentially managed by boomers or Gen X. And I mean, I'm part of that Gen X generation. Bill, are you a Gen X or a boomer? Am I allowed to ask?
Yeah. I don't know. I'll answer though. I'm at the very, very, very tail end of boomer.
Yeah. I'm Gen X, Ruth, so I'm right there
you're
with you.
Gen X, we're Gen X, yeah. So, but, we were brought up in a culture. I mean, I worked in financial services for like 20 years. That culture was all about presenteeism. It was all about being seen to work incredibly hard. And obviously working hard, but it was more about, the presentation of the fact that you were working hard. And if our generation are the people who are ultimately the managers of people who are quiet quitting, maybe we just can't understand that. We can't comprehend that. And if that's the only work model that we've ever worked to.
I could see that. Bill, any reactions to that? You agree with the Ruth's assessment?
My usual, I agree. And I think the reason it's tied to Gen Z is, it's very superficial and also to the extent that people think of it more on the slacker side than the do as little as possible. They just associate that behavior with effectively the cartoon or caricature version of Gen Z.
Right.
I also think that, Gen Z is definitely a generation that's much more comfortable just calling it like it is. And it's like, I don't want to work that hard. I don't want to work crazy hours. That's not what my job description says. And so I think they're much more willing to say it versus, Gen X and baby boomers who were, grew up in a culture where that's not appropriate, both being that forthcoming and also, admitting that you're not working harder than everybody else. And I'll also say that, in thinking about this, there's one thing that keeps coming. I keep finding these things that keep coming up when you do research on quiet quitting is, it sort of all tails. Everybody can't agree on anything except that it overlaps with the movie Office Space, which came out in 1999, where, the main character, basically made his career out of not trying at work and doing the bare minimum. But even that, it turns out, when I was thinking about it, isn't, it goes back to like, there's The Secret of My Success is another movie, and How to Succeed in Business Without Really Trying back in the 60s, which was from a book in the 50s, which is before any Gen X or Gen Z person was even born, and so these ideas of how to work less and succeed in business, that's not new, and it's not Gen Z. I think the term quiet quitting and sort of the amount we're talking about it, this year, is new. But I don't, I think there's little bit of everybody in this discussion.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think it's a mistake for us to assume also that for those who do sort of assume this is a Gen Z thing, to assume it's because Gen Z is somehow lazy. It's been my observation. So between the generations, there's always this little pendulum swinging back and forth from different, whether it's political pendulum or just thoughtful pendulum about way you do things, or whether you want to be, married young and have kids, or if you want to go a little farther and have a career before you do that kind of stuff. And with Gen Z, I've noticed, the millennials, it felt like the thing was, and again, this is all gross generalization, so take it all with a giant grain of salt. But the thing I started to notice with millennials was they really want that feedback. They want to understand how their meaningful work is mattering and are they engaging with it right. Gen Z, just looking at my own daughters who are now in their entering their early 20s, they just don't take any crap. Like, and they're not afraid to tell you. They're not afraid to take any crap. They're just like, we don't want to live in your world with your rules. It's like, we're going to work hard, but we're going to work hard about things we care about. And if you're not giving me a really good reason, I don't care about your old school rules, man. I'm going to go do my own thing. It's kind of like the 70s are back, but in a different, but with less flowers. Right. So, it's sort of an interesting thing.
We did a good job as parents empowering them. That's what I say.
Well, I hope so.
There you go.
We'll see what happens. But it's interesting talking to the college. This is a whole other episode about where the colleges are and the reactions, having my kids now in there. It's been sort of interesting, right? But that's a whole other topic. So, well, that's what we think about quiet quitting. What do you guys all think? Please let us know. What's your organization seeing when it comes to this sort of phenomenon? What is your organization doing to try to help your employees not get into this space? Or maybe you're thinking that it's really just a work-life balance issue and these sorts of issues are been around forever and we're tackling those. Well, what do you think? Let us know. Either email us at coffee@payscale.com or tweet us over on Twitter @payscale. Thank you for listening to Comp and Coffee. Comp and Coffee is a PayScale production dedicated to the compensation community. We welcome your feedback. Send email to coffee@payscale.com, tweet us @payscale, or share your thoughts in our PayScale Connect community. Until next time, keep your coffee hot and your data fresh.